Hello, and welcome to this episode of Exploring Intersections. Catholic Sisters on Racism, Migration, and Climate. Here's our host, Cherish Badzinski.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Exploring Intersections. This program is made possible through the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, Region 10. Over the course of this year, we're talking with expert panelists about some of the biggest social issues of our time. If you have missed our past programs, you can watch them on YouTube or download a podcast version. Today, our panel conversation centers on eliminating gun violence. There are an estimated 265 million privately owned guns in our country. The American Journal of Medicine reports that Americans are 25 times more likely to die from gun homicide than those who live in other wealthy countries. The Associated Press reports that 316 people are shot in America every day. Rarely does a week go by without another mass shooting, another hashtag, another household or school or city in mourning. Is eliminating gun violence possible? And if so, how? To help us better understand today's topic, we are joined by three panelists. Sister Donna Liette is a sister of the Precious Blood. She is a restorative justice practitioner and director of the women's programs at Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. She is a peacemaking circle trainer and has offered this restorative practice in Cook County Juvenile Detention Center, as well as places throughout the states and in Nicaragua and Chile. Currently, she provides hospitality and support services to families, particularly mothers who have lost children to violence or incarceration. Welcome, Sister Donna.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone here. It's good to be here.
Kim Westerman is a gun violence prevention activist from St. Louis, Missouri. For the past 4 years, she has been an active volunteer with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, the nation's largest grassroots movement to end gun violence. She currently serves as the leader of the St. Louis group for Moms Demand Action, coordinating local efforts and volunteers, and serves on their National Anti-Racism Steering Committee. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Leslie Washington is a national trainer with Everytown for Gun Safety and Survivor Fellow, State Survivor Lead, and volunteer with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Leslie's cousin Reginald died by gun suicide, and her cousin Keith was murdered in December of 2015. His murder remained unsolved. And Leslie herself is a survivor of gun violence as well. We'll hear more about that in a moment. Today, she serves as an advocate for survivors and those impacted by gun violence. Welcome, Leslie. We'll start with Sister Donna and Kim. And Leslie, you might be muted, so let's just check that. Sister Donna and Kim, why is this effort of eliminating gun violence important to you? What compelled you to get involved, and what keeps you engaged in the work? Sister Donna, let's start with you.
Okay, those are three major questions. So I think the first question is why it's so important to me. And I think because living in Chicago and what I have seen and what I've heard in the past 11 years has really broken my heart. So the Chicago nuns in Chicago, or Chicago Sisters, initiated a program, or really a prayer vigil. And every last Saturday of the month, we stand at a site where one of the persons who was killed in Chicago that month, we pray at that site. And of course, we gather all sorts of persons. We invite the families, we invite churches, whatever, gather there. And I think what has really compelled me to stay with this, trying to eliminate the gun violence and the violence in our city, is every month it seems there's more homicides. And in July of 2021, just a month ago, we had 111 human beings' lives taken by gun violence. And so as we continue to hear those families wailing and crying out, why? Why my children? And sometimes they're asked, well, they belong to a gang. And that's not true of all of them. And so every family is harmed by this violence. And so it compels me to stay with them. When I see a mother coming to me and saying, I lost my third son to gun violence, a grandmother saying, I've lost 3 of my grandchildren to gun violence. This compels me to stay with this movement of trying to eliminate the violence in our city and all cities.
Thank you, Sister Donna. Kim, going to you, why is eliminating gun violence important to you, and why are you involved?
I first got involved just because I've been following the news for years, and it just seemed like a constant drumbeat of mass shootings, but also living in St. Louis City, we're in, by some standards or some measures, the most violent city in the US. And so I was just seeing the way it's affecting my community. And at some point I just said, I need to do something. So I went to my first Moms Demand Action meeting. And the more I've learned about gun violence and the gun laws in our country, the more I've realized we can be preventing deaths if we take some common sense measures. And so I felt like I could make a real difference in this arena. So I've just gotten more and more involved.
And Leslie, I know this issue is particularly close to your heart. How has gun violence touched your life? Leslie, you're muted. It seems our connection with Leslie is really poor. Leslie, we might have you try calling in on your telephone. The connection has gotten really weak. So maybe we'll have you call in and I'll pose that question to you again once we have you connected again. Sorry about that. Tech problems are just part of the deal, aren't they, with live broadcasts? Often the mass shootings command the headlines, and for good reason, but there are risks related to guns that go far beyond that. Let's talk about some of the other risks and how prevalent they are. Kim, let's start with you. What are some of the other risks besides the mass shootings?
Mass shootings are heartbreaking, and they certainly grab the headlines, but they make up less than 1% of all the gun deaths in the US. Actually, the most gun deaths, 60% of gun deaths are suicides with a firearm. And that our rate here in the US is 10 times higher than in any other high-income country. And just owning a gun triples your risk of death by suicide. So that's certainly an issue we need to be talking about. How do we protect people who might be a harm to themselves? How can we prevent those suicides? Also, my organization really tries to address all the types of gun violence. It's an issue. Unintentional shootings by children are an issue. There's 369 last year in the US. Just guns weren't properly stored, and young people can access them. And it's not an accident because it's preventable if we properly store guns. So my organization tries to address those things through our Be Smart program, educating adults about proper gun storage that can prevent both gun suicides and these unintentional shootings. But then also just gun homicide is the other third of gun deaths in the country. And we have a 25 times higher rate, as you said in the beginning, of gun deaths by gun homicides. So, all these things really affect our communities. So, it's not just the people who have been shot and injured or shot and killed, but also their families and their communities. There's ripples of effects that affect them all.
Absolutely. Sister Donna, any thoughts to add to that about the additional risks?
Well, what you said, Kim, is so powerful, the effect it has on families. And, when one person is killed, it affects a whole family, a community. And so many people are traumatized by that. Our own youth here, they all know at least one person who was killed, probably maybe multiple persons. And I think that what I think about it, the mass shootings were targeted a lot toward our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Asians, our Blacks. It just builds up a whole system of hate, a culture of hate, instead of a culture of love and compassion. So I think that separateness, that dividedness, that what we should be working toward is a oneness. And I think this whole shooting and violence just separates people and destroys people and causes so much trauma and grief. So those are some of the risks, I guess, and sadnesses that I experience.
Yeah. Leslie, I see we have you again. Do we have a good connection this time?
I hope and pray that we do.
It actually
Much better.
wonderful. Yeah. So let's go back to you and let's share with us, if you will, your personal story about how your life has been touched by gun violence.
Sure. This is my personal story and experiences with domestic and firearm violence. I was with my ex-husband for 9 years. 9 years of being with a controlling, vindictive, and mean individual. But our story went on long after we separated. Even when I was finally free, only after he cracked the orbit in my left eye, leaving permanent damage, I didn't feel free. I arrived in Cape Girardeau, where I stayed at a safe house for a brief period of time. Right after I left, he posted a picture on social media polishing a handgun while a fully loaded clip lay on the bed behind him. I knew what was happening. He was threatening me. He would often tell me that he was going to kill me. Then more than ever, I believed him. He even threatened my mom at her home, telling her that he would find me at the safe house where I was residing and kill me. He even showed up at my ex parte hearing, trying to scare me. That my ex-husband had access to a firearm, even though he had a history of domestic abuse from his past relationships and was a convicted felon, shows what happens when our gun laws are not adequate and not adequately enforced. He also would send threatening messages through unknown Facebook accounts. When I arrived in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, I reached out to his probation officer to let her know what he had done to me and that he was in jail. But really nothing much was adequately done. Guns in the hands of a domestic abuser can turn domestic violence into murder. Access to a gun in a domestic violence situation makes it 5 times more likely that a woman will be killed. Over 2 out of 5 women in Missouri reported some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime. Guns are the weapon of choice for domestic violence abusers. In Missouri, firearms were used in nearly 2/3 of the intimate partner violence fatalities. The bottom line is this: there are currently gaps in Missouri law that give domestic abusers easy access to guns. Missouri lawmakers should follow the lead of the nearly 24 states that have taken action in recent years to protect women and families by passing HB 473 to keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. This was only one of my experiences with gun violence. In 2015, I watched alongside my family as the police could not solve the murder of my cousin Keith, who was shot and killed. And in 1984, I cried when another cousin, Reginald, died by gun suicide. Our family still doesn't have closure from their deaths. Gun violence needs to be stopped. It can be stopped. That is why I joined the Missouri chapter of Moms Demand Action to fight gun violence of all types. Gun violence tears apart families everywhere. Gun violence is not just in Baltimore or New York or in St. Louis. It's in small rural parts of the country as well. In Missouri, we have the 8th highest rate of gun violence deaths in the country. Yet Missouri has some of the most lax gun laws in the country. Here are my thoughts on hope. Hope is an optimistic state of mind that is based on an expectation of positive outcomes with respect to events and circumstances in one's life or the world at large. As a verb, its definitions include expect with confidence and to cherish a desire with anticipation. My hope is that not one woman will ever have to endure what I endured when I was going through domestic violence. There is light at the end of the tunnel. This too shall pass. And although I will never get back the 9 years that I wasted in my abusive relationship, I will continue to work to make sure women and children can be safe. I'm sharing my story because for the sake of justice and human rights, communities have an interest and an obligation to end domestic violence.
Thank you, Leslie, for sharing your story. Intersectional issues are complex related to gun violence. Last week, the Mexican government sued several US gun manufacturers, alleging that lack of gun control has contributed to gun trafficking, gun violence, and gun homicide in Mexico. So we think of this as a domestic issue, but clearly we are crossing borders with this. And violence, of course, is a root cause of migration. But I also want to talk today about how gun violence intersects with racism. Any thoughts on how racism intersects with this issue? Leslie, let's go to you first.
I feel that the gun violence intersects with racism, especially the fact that majority of gun violence, it happens in Black and brown and marginalized communities. And it also happens against women, men, boys of various ages with the police brutality of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others, Tamir Rice, just different ones that have been impacted by gun violence. So it's very serious. And it doesn't matter what race. I mean, it happens in Mexican communities. It happens in some white communities, but more so in, like I said, in the Black and brown community.
Mm-hmm. Kim, any additional thoughts on that, on racism and the intersection with gun violence?
The thing about these social justice issues is that they're all intertwined. So you can't pick apart gun violence without addressing race and poverty. So it's because of systemic racism and long ago policies that have created these that have created some neighborhoods that are underfunded and undervalued, that don't get the resources they need. Those are the neighborhoods where we see the most gun homicides and gun assaults. So there's all these correlations, and it's such a deeply ingrained problem in this country that it's going to take a many-pronged approach to address it.
Mm. And we'll start discussing that in a minute. Sister Donna, any thoughts on the intersections with gun violence and our other topics?
Well, that one, I don't have much more to add. I certainly agree with both Kim and Leslie that, just the lack of resources, the systemic racism is so deep, and the Black and brown communities, as you said, Leslie, so disproportionately targeted with this violence. So I just support what both of them said. I see the same thing and hear the same thing in the city of Chicago.
Yeah. There are many differing opinions on how to address this issue. What are some steps that are shown to make the biggest difference in eliminating gun violence? Sister Donna, let's start with you.
Well, for me, I think that we're a restorative justice hub, our Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation here in Chicago. And we have really worked hard to be a restorative justice site where we offer radical hospitality. People will come into our center, sometimes very angry, but they find a safe place. And when we have conflicts within the community, not necessarily homicides, but other kinds of harm being, we call the persons together who've caused the harm as well as those who have been harmed, and to sit together in a circle and really talk out their differences and try to come to some kind of a resolution where they can at least begin to trust one another, can begin to build a relationship. because I think a lot of the harm that's being caused is because there's no relationship. Neighbors don't even know neighbors. They say gangs aren't organized that much, at least in Chicago, because some of the chiefs have either been locked up or deceased. And so it's just black on black, even killing each other. And so, I think it's really important to build relationships, to get out in our communities. Brian Stevenson writes a powerful book on just mercy, and he talks about 4 things. And one of them is proximity. That, so many people talk about the violence, but they haven't really been right in the mess. And I think our proximity is so important that we actually know people who have taken lives. We know people who have been harmed, and we can talk to those persons. And the other one is changing narratives. Sometimes we so much punish people, but their mental health issues are so deep. Their trauma is so deep. And so to understand why people are causing the harm that they're causing. And the other thing, that we all have hard work to do. And again, instead of sometimes just talking about it, let's get in and do the hard work. Let's get in the mess and stay with the problem, though, and keep on holding on to hope, because I believe there is hope. But we do need to be proximate and change some narratives. So I believe that as we sit together in circle, we can break down some of the walls of anger and hate.
Kim, any additional thoughts on steps that can work to address this?
Yeah, I mean, one thing similar to what Sister Donna was talking about are violence interruption programs, like Pure Violence. And a lot of cities are investing in these. They're programs that have a public health approach that treat gun violence like a epidemic, which we're all very familiar with fighting epidemics right now, aren't we? But they're very localized programs that work to build relationships with people in the community and try to prevent violence before it starts, interrupt that conflict that they see uprising. So I think, like Sister Donna is saying, those are programs we're seeing pop up all over the country. St. Louis has just invested in 3 neighborhood sites. So they're very small, but they've seen some good numbers so far. I also think there's some legislative solutions at more of a macro level that we can try. The first and foremost one is background checks. 90% of Americans support background checks, and I think a lot of people say, well, there's already laws on the books that you have to have background checks on every gun sale. But in reality, there's a few loopholes that are making it so that not every gun sale has to be subject to a background check. So right now, it's only required on gun sales from a federally licensed firearm dealer. So there's a gun show loophole. That means if you go to a gun show or you find a listing online, you can buy a gun without a background check if it's from an unlicensed dealer. So here in Missouri, it's perfectly legal to meet somebody in a parking lot and buy a gun from them without any sort of check. There's also the Charleston loophole, and that is related to the shooting that happened, the mass shooting that happened in Charleston, South Carolina a few years back, where the shooter was able to get a gun because he went to a licensed firearm dealer. They ran a background check, but it took more than 3 days to get a result. And if it takes more than 3 days, it's automatic that someone can just buy the gun without the check being completed. So that sale shouldn't have gone through. There were some flags on his record. And obviously it had deadly consequences. So those are just 2 loopholes we could easily close. A lot of states are doing that on their own, but we certainly have an opportunity right now at the federal level to close those background checks. It's passed the House, but the Senate hasn't voted on it yet. And I bet Leslie could talk a lot more about red flag laws.
Yeah, Leslie, your thoughts?
Well, Missouri is not a red flag state. So with my ex-husband, by him being a felon, he was a convicted felon, and he only spent a minimal amount of time in jail and then got out, on bond. And people in his family have access to guns. They're always, they were always going like, oh, we're going to go to Cabela's and, let's go look at a weapon. And, so they had guns and around and everything. So just with him putting that firearm on Instagram with a fully loaded clip was just, and him being very accessible to having a firearm is just very scary, and like Kim said, the loopholes, the Charleston loophole, and it's just so easily accessible for people to get firearms without passing a background check. And like I said before, I just think it's imperative that legislators, do what they're in office to do, to close those loopholes, because these background checks, they save lives. And I agree, wholeheartedly that those things are very important. And with this pandemic, gun violence, as we see, has exacerbated. Domestic violence has definitely exacerbated, because people are in close quarters and things of that nature. So people are, they are flustered because they don't have a job. They don't know how they're going to pay their bills. They just don't know how things are going to, add up or whatever. So you just kind of, have to tippy toe around the situation. But it's also, and, people need to be aware that domestic violence doesn't happen just in October. It happens 365 days a year, 7 days a week. Somebody right now as we speak could be going through it and we not even know about it. But if we don't get that out there and get that in the community and, do the things that need to be done with the gun violence and domestic violence and everything, then we will never know, and it doesn't just happen like in my age group. It happens with women that are much older than me, that have dealt with domestic violence. And a lot of them are they were raised in that era where they don't talk about domestic violence. They keep it under the table, they sweep it under the rug and they just deal with it. Well, no, you have to get out there, you have to talk about it. Like Kim said, build these partnerships in the community, work with your community partners and, have the Be Smart message about gun violence, especially with children, because children are susceptible to getting a firearm and killing an innocent child. Just it's just a dangerous situation, and we just need to be aware, and we just need to take the steps, especially with school getting ready to start. You just never know what's going on in a child's home. So you just have to be aware of the signs and and just be aware of what's going on in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim?
Yeah, could I follow up on that? Like Leslie, I think you provided a great illustration of the need for red flag laws. So they are they're laws that would allow families or loved ones or law enforcement who see these signs that you're talking about. If someone posted something on social media that's a threat, that would be grounds for starting a due process to ask a judge to intervene and temporarily prevent somebody in crisis of harming someone else or themselves if they're at risk for suicide from accessing guns. So that could prevent school shootings. Like you're saying, if there's a gun in the home and someone's in a crisis, it could keep guns out of their hands. It could keep it from a domestic abuser. It could keep someone who's just having a mental health episode that might commit suicide. So the number of states have passed red flag laws, or they're also called extreme risk protection orders. And it's just a really exciting way that we could possibly prevent death.
Wow, and it really sounds like it has to be a collective effort, that we all have to be mindful of what is happening online or what those signs are that might signal that somebody's in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Very interesting. There are, of course, those who say that guns make us safer. What is the reality here? Kim, let's go to you.
I mean, if you want to make the argument that having more guns makes us more safe, then the US should be the safest country on earth. But I think, as we've said a couple times, our rate of gun violence is 25 times higher than any peer country. So I think that pretty well debunks that theory.
Sister Donna, anything to add to that?
Well, you know, I think that for our youth that carry guns, I think they feel secure, but not safe. I mean, they might feel like they're safe. It's sort of like, you know, if we have an alarm system in our home, we feel secure. But does it really keep us safe? Not necessarily. It might help in some ways. But, you know, so I think that for our youth, carrying guns is a security. They know that sometimes the adults in their community are not going to protect them. The police are not going to probably protect them. And so in some ways, they take it upon themselves to have that security, but it does not make them safe. And I don't think anybody has saved their life. We try to tell our youth that have saved their life or their friend's life by having carried a gun. But, you know, the sad thing, and kind of related to the past question, was, you know, our youth will say, you know, it's easier to get a gun than it is to get pizza, you know, because of the gun trafficking, you know, the straw purchasers that get the guns and then bring them into our community, almost to allow the young Black and brown youth to just take each other's lives, it seems, sometimes very sad and very frustrating. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would add to that, guns get into our community and it's just sad of how they come in.
Yeah, and at the same time, we're seeing sales of guns skyrocketing during the pandemic. Leslie, any additional thoughts about the issue of whether guns actually make us safer?
I really don't think that they do. I mean, I believe that it creates more of a hassle, a headache, because it's so much violence, so much just dissension and hatred, and having a gun is just adding fuel to the fire, you know? So we just have to be more vigilant, you know, when we're talking about gun violence and gun violence awareness and these extreme, you know, these ERPO laws, as they're called, red flag laws. You know, we just have to be more vigilant and get that message out there and let people be aware, because it's serious and it's not getting any better. It's only getting worse.
Yeah. Let's talk about the long-term effects of gun violence. Sister Donna, I know you work with people every day who face this reality. So let's start with you. What long-term effects are you seeing in your work?
Yeah, I see a lot of that. I worked with about 50 women who have lost children to gun violence, and it just keeps multiplying. I started with a couple. 10 years ago, I had 2 or 3 women. Now I have, well, we have really 80 women. Some have lost their children to incarceration. Some have children in prison for murder, and some have children who have been murdered. The same mother might have some of both. What I see is just the breakdown of families. You know, when they have a child whose life has been taken, you know, it just, everyone goes through a different way of grieving. And so sometimes there's divorce happens before, there's sometimes domestic violence because of that. The trauma, you know, I think we can't understand the terrific trauma that a mother goes through when her child, the mother tells me that, you know, while she had to stand there by her dead body, her son's dead body for 3 hours, you know, while the investigation went on, but just to stand there and think of what happened and why did it happen. And then most of these are like cold cases. No one finds out who took their life. And so I think it's just the disruptiveness in a family, the disruptiveness in a community, the trauma, and from trauma, just more and more negative things happen when people are traumatized. And so also the alcoholism, the drug use, the increased violence because of, you know, the use of, because of so much violence in our community. So it's really destroying our families, our communities, our churches. Sometimes aren't even allowing certain people in because they're afraid. That whole sense of fear, that whole sense of hate, to me, it's just really heartbreaking to see what the destructiveness of violence.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim, tell us about the long-term effects that you're seeing in the work that you do.
I think Sister Donna put it so well. I just want to add one note, which is just that there are many physical uh, long-term effects as well. So 100 people are shot and killed every day, but 200 are shot and injured. And you think about how many people are walking around with those physical injuries that affect their lives, might cause them to be disabled, any number of effects there. It's just the effects go on and on.
Yeah, and disability is definitely a topic that we don't talk about very much when we talk about gun violence. So I'm glad you touched on that. Leslie, I know that all of these issues are so close to you. What long-term effects have you yourself experienced, and have you seen your family experience as a result of gun violence?
Well, just like, with my cousin, that was the first time that I really dealt with gun violence was when my cousin, died by, took a gun and ended his life. He was a happy-go-lucky person. And for him to, take his life and just end it, it just it's puzzling to me. It's just like what was going on to where, you had to really seriously think about, planning and contemplating to actually, end your life. What type of mental were you going through, and then when I got here and was dealing with my domestic violence and stuff for the 9 years, and then having my ex put a, firearm on Instagram, that was another like aha moment, like, oh my goodness, like, what's really going on. And then my cousin in 2015, and we still to this day, we don't have closure for his death and what the reasoning was behind it for him, being murdered and taken away from us. I mean, his mom, I'm sure she deals with it on a daily basis. But so those are the reasons why I do the things I do for Moms Demand Action and Everytown for gun safety, just so families don't ever have to go through what I went through. Because like Sister Donna said and Kim said, it does not just affect the family, it affects the community. Like I'm advocating, for a young lady, Maddie. This is her button, that I wear. She was 15 years old, and on the 24th is the anniversary, of her death. And she was 15 years old and she was taken away from her family, so, and this family still does not have closure. They still don't, you know, anything like that. So that's why I advocate so hard so this family can get closure. I promise that I want to give them closure. So because they're grieving the long-term effects of losing a child is very difficult. I mean, it messes with your mental state. You depressed. You don't half the time you don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to do anything. You want to just be away from the world. You don't want to have friends. You may not even have friends because you're so mentally distraught and destroyed by the loss of your child or your family member. You just wonder, like, why am I even still here? Why am I not dead? Or, why don't I have my child, basically. And I always tell people, I said, nobody can tell you how to grieve the loss of your child. Nobody can tell you when to stop sharing your story. Nobody can tell you how to feel, what to do. Nobody can tell you that. That's something that you go through and that you have to handle and that you have to go through and process, because there are times when little things may trigger me. So then I have to bring it back and I have to calm myself down. Like if I get a message from my ex or a follow request or something like that. So then I get panicky all of a sudden. And then I just like, okay, he can't harm me. He can't do anything to me. I'm not going to let him, get in my psyche and, mess with my mental, and I'm having a good day and I'm trying not to have a bad day because here he comes intruding again. So it's just things that people go through, their mental, their physical, their health. It affects your health. You can get PTSD from it. Your health is affected. You may have like stomach issues. You may have migraines. It's just different things that are involved, and you just have to, we always talk about in Moms Demand Action, like self-care. You have to do things for self-care, because if yourself is not good, then how would you be good to someone else, to advocate for someone else, or to talk to somebody else if your mental and your peace is not calm? So I do things. I walk, I listen to music, I do different things like that so I can be mentally prepared to talk to someone and it may not be me talking to them. It may be just me listening, being empathetic, and not making it about Leslie, making it about them, listening to them and being a listening ear to them, and being so they're calm and they're cool and they don't explode, or whatever the case may be. Because when you have that loss, you have all these mixed feelings and mixed emotions, and the littlest thing may tick you off, and you may just go completely off for no reason. But it's because you've gone through trauma, and trauma affects everybody differently. And people need to understand that me telling my story, me sharing my story, that's my form of therapy. That's my form of healing. Because if there's one person in this audience today that has heard anything that I said, that something has resonated with them, that they can too get out of their situation and can see the positives that I've accomplished, then I'm happy. If I share it 9 more times and maybe 3 more people get something out of it or whatever, then I'm happy. I'm completing my assignment. I'm here for a reason. And these are the reasons why I'm here. So I can share what I need to share and get it out there in the atmosphere.
Thank you for that, Leslie. Many people who are tuning into this program, even if they don't own guns themselves, likely know people who own guns, or maybe they have neighbors who own guns. What kinds of conversations should we be having about that reality? Kim?
Well, sadly, this issue has become so partisan and so ideological. People aren't willing to even start having the conversation. And I think that's where we have to start. We have to be willing to start having tough conversations. And I think the place to start is we're not trying to take away guns, because all we want is to keep our families safe. And I know people own guns because they want to keep themselves and their families safe. So let's start there. That's our common understanding. So what are some ways that we can keep people more safe? Because obviously there's an issue. People are being hurt and injured and killed. So like I said, 90% of Americans support having background checks on every gun sale. So let's talk about that and how we can make sure that happens. Just ways to, I think the key thing is we want to keep guns out of the hands of people who can be a danger to themselves or others. I don't think anybody really can argue with that. So let's talk about how to do that.
Yeah, well said. Sister Donna, any thoughts on those conversations? How do we approach this topic?
agree with Kim, but it's a very partisan thing and political thing actually. And who's making the money from all of this? I think are some questions that need to be asked. But I think along with that, I think in our churches and in our families, particularly, I think in our churches, we should be talking more about, the laws, the statistics. But I think that it's very important to have like a mother who has really experienced this, or someone like Leslie, or someone who's paralyzed, to come and talk to a group of people, a small group of people, and say, look, this is the effect that gun violence had upon me. And then I think when people really, again, are proximate and really hear a story and really know someone who has been paralyzed by gun violence, who has been threatened, who has had a son or daughter or grandchild murdered, a little 3-year-old murdered, some of those stories, I think that becomes more real. And so I would think that that's a good conversation, is to begin to have small groups, circles, I believe in circles, to sit and talk about these issues and what are your thoughts about it? What are your thoughts about it? And see, is there some common understanding or a deeper understanding of what the guns in our communities are doing to destroy and to cause hate and anger and just lack of hope?
Mm-hmm. We have a question from our audience, so we'll go to that, and feel free to jump in, any of you who have a thought about this. The question is, do violent TV shows, movies, and video games have anything to do with gun violence in real life? Any thoughts?
Yes, I believe that the violence that is portrayed on TV shows, it has a big, it plays a part in it. I definitely agree.
Kim,
Also agree. Oh, yeah, I also agree. And I think that for us in the community where I work, it's more the Facebook, that some of our youth are looking at Facebook and they're seeing who has the guns, who has the money. And also they're sharing with their friends who they might be going out to harm that night. And so it really becomes very dangerous, through Facebook. I think also when they watch like videos and TV or wherever, they begin to not realize that this could be real. It's like, that's not real. But when they take it out into the streets and out into the community, it's real. And so I think that younger people with younger minds can't differentiate between the real and the movie.
Mm-hmm. Kim, anything to add?
I would just say, I mean, that makes logical sense, but it's really hard to prove that correlation. And that takes me to another point, which there's been legislation that prevented the CDC from gathering data on gun violence and trying to figure out root causes and from a public health approach. And so perhaps we could study this more. I think they are allocating funds for that again now, because I would love to see that.
Yeah. Another question from the audience. This one is for Sister Donna. Does Chicago, Illinois have hospital-based violence intervention programs or community-based violence intervention programs? And do women you work with get involved with these programs?
Yes, at Precious Blood Ministry, where I work, we have the Institute of Nonviolence. And I don't know if this is exactly what they're asking about, but it's a very strong program that when they understand that there's some tension, that there's going to be some restitution, this group goes out into that neighborhood and tries to break down that animosity and talk to individuals and bring them in and so forth. So that's a big help, I think, for breaking down a lot of the violence that's happening in like perhaps the back of the yards. That's one agency. I think our own PBMR, Precious Blood Ministry, I think provides a safe place where people can come in who have a great conflict and sit down in circle and try to work out some of those things. So, and there's a whole restorative justice hubs we're one of them. We're a model, but there's 7 different restorative justice hubs in the area of Chicago, especially in the area where there's great violence. And they're doing different things. One's more the legal hub. Another one might be dealing more with, like we do with our mothers and families and the violence they're experiencing. So each one has a little different focus depending on what the need is in that community. So I don't know if that answers the question for the call in or not.
Okay, great. How can we build a culture of life and accompany our families and communities? Kim, I'm thinking of you as I read this question because I know you have some thoughts on how congregations can make an impact on this issue as well.
Well, it's maybe a tangent, but are tangentially connected. But yeah, I do work for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. And one action we took, or the congregation, the St. Louis province in particular took, was joining with some other organizations in investing in a gun manufacturing company. So that way, they didn't want their money necessarily to support the manufacture of guns, but they wanted to have the ability to be shareholders and get a seat at the table to talk to them about maybe there's ways that they could mandate having gun locks with the guns, or talking to them about their lobbying efforts with the NRA, so they could make some change at that level. So I think there's opportunities for congregations to speak through investment, as well as educational events like this. I think just talking and raising the issues, listening to survivors is really important for starting to change the culture.
Leslie, this question is for you. How can guns be prevented from getting into the hands of abusive partners?
Just to make sure that if they access a gun, that they go through the proper background check procedures before even purchasing a firearm. I know that when I was with my ex, like I said, we would always, go to the pawn shops, and just do the preventative, the measures for, having access to a gun, and just being aware of, if your partner has a gun. He never had them in the home we shared, but this was, after that, after me leaving and going to safety, he put that on Instagram and things of that nature. So just kind of being aware and also being very careful, when you're around that person, and just the main thing is just being, and then if you feel that you're in danger, there are websites, there's 1-800 numbers for domestic violence. There's websites for domestic violence. There's resources, because when I was going through my situation, I knew there were resources, but once I, looked, looked online, looked up, for some reason, Cape Girardeau popped up in my brain, and, popped up, so I called, I did, did the necessary steps and things of that nature, coming to Cape and getting on a Greyhound bus and never looking back, and then just the resources, the counseling and stuff that I've gone through, I still go through counseling periodically. I do a support group, on Tuesday evenings. So just being aware and doing the research, my experiences have afforded me to being able to Google and do presentations and things of that nature, to get that message out there about domestic violence.
Yeah, and that self-care aspect sounds really important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Let's be honest here. It's dispiriting seeing news of gun deaths and injuries every day. The work that you're doing is hard work. And with so many guns out there, it can feel overwhelming. What gives you three hope when it comes to the effort to eliminate gun violence? Sister Donna?
I think my hope is that there is a lot of interest, maybe because there's been so much violence that people are starting to be aware of, like, this is really out of control. And so I think that in our churches, and now that we're opening up more, that, people are coming and being circle trained in our hub. And I think as more people get circle trained and go into their churches, into their families, into their schools, and start, especially in our schools, we're training teachers to sit down with their students and talk about the danger of guns and are they really bringing safety into the community. So I think that this gives me hope that more and more people will sit down and have these conversations, these hard conversations. And then, as one sister said to me one day, you can talk about it all you want. It is sad, but what are you doing about it? Let's get out and do the hard work. Once we've sat in circle and have the information, have the conversations, that gives me hope that when we talk about it and then take action. And I believe that that will happen. And unfortunately, because there's been so much violence, people are starting to say, wow, we better do something about this. All of our families are being touched by this, not just, the Black community.
Yeah, we're definitely at a
disproportionately the Black, but still it's getting everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Kim, what gives you hope?
Yeah, I love having Sister Donna here. I love hearing kind of your interpersonal micro level discussions and the hope they give you. Because I'm always so focused on the macro level, the legislative successes. So I've seen that just in the last couple of years, this has really gone from a third rail issue that politicians wouldn't discuss at all to, in the last election cycle, this was a central issue that every politician was having to weigh in on and take a stance. And yeah, we haven't seen a real movement at the federal level to have legislation, but in the state level, there's definitely progress being made. Just in 2021, there's been 30 gun laws passed around the nation that can help save lives, and then dozens other bad gun laws have been blocked. So things are happening. People are on the ground working. I see it with the volunteers of Moms Demand Action. People are just tireless, speaking out about this, recognizing that it's a huge issue, and I think change is coming.
Leslie, I know you touched on hope early on. Anything to quickly add to that about what gives you hope?
I agree with Kim and Sister Donna that my hope is that we end this pandemic of gun violence. I mean, we're in a pandemic of COVID-19. So just, and the gun violence is definitely a pandemic because it affects marginalized communities and things of that nature. So I just think that it's vital that we have these conversations and we involve others in these conversations, and just so they can get that awareness out there, in their communities. We have a Be Smart message for children, and we do different tabling events and things of that nature, to where we talk about the Be Smart message and things of that, and one of the it's SMART, and it's SAMART. And so, model good behavior, with your guns. And if your child is going to a friend's house, and if they have firearms in the house, if they're stored safely, if the ammunition is in one location and the firearm is in another location, because you see too many things where children are getting access to firearms and little babies are getting, shot and killed on a daily basis. And so if we have those conversations with your friends, your family, like I tell people all the time, I don't care how many guns you have. You can have an arsenal. I don't care. As long as you are safe with them and you protect yourself from doing anything crazy or anything of that nature. Just model safe, safe knowledge, safe storage, all of that. So those things are very important to me.
Okay, thank you all. And thank you to everyone in the audience who submitted questions for our panelists. We're sorry that we're not able to get to all of your questions, but we welcome you to continue the conversation on our Facebook page. With the better understanding of the complex issues surrounding gun violence and what's at stake, it's time to talk about next steps. Each of our panelists have provided suggested action items to help us as we move toward eliminating gun violence. Sister Donna, tell us about your action item.
I think I've talked about it throughout the panel, and just to participate in workshops on restorative justice practices, and maybe come and have a 4-day circle training. There's circle trainings here in Chicago and elsewhere, but you can visit cjyi.org and you can register to get circle trained. And people come from all over the United States and beyond, or just visit our own website at ppmr.org, which will tell you a lot about the way that we're working toward reducing gun violence and providing safety for our community.
Great. Leslie, tell us about your action item. Leslie?
Okay, I'm sorry. My action item, like I said, is to visit momsdemandaction.org if you would like to get involved with Moms Demand Action in every town for gun safety. And then also everystat.org is a website where you can put in your state and it can tell you where they fall as far as like gun violence and statistics and things of that nature. So those are two of my action items also. And then also text ready to 64433 to start volunteering with Moms Demand Action.
Thank you so much. And Kim, tell us about your action item.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that don't let the name scare you away. You don't have to be a mom to get involved with our organization. I'm not, so mothers and others are welcome to join us. And I know I've talked a lot about legislative things that we could do, but we can also make a real difference with the executive branch. So one thing that's happening right now is that the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, is currently working on a rule regarding ghost guns. And these are basically people right now can buy the components to make guns online, and it's unregulated. There's no serial numbers, no background checks required. So people are making untraceable guns in their homes. So we can make public comment through August 19th to say that we would like those to be regulated. So you can either use this QR code that you see on the screen or just text GHOST to 64433. Either one will take you to a web form that Every Town for Gun Safety has set up. So you can just plug in your information and send it really quickly.
Great action items. Thank you all for sharing your experiences and your thoughts on eliminating gun violence today.
Thank you.
And thank you to the incredible team of professionals working behind the scenes to bring this program to life every month. Next month on Exploring Intersections, Catholic Sisters on Racism, Migration, and Climate, Economic Justice. What is economic justice and how do we achieve it? What systemic barriers exist that lead to economic wealth gaps and continue to hold us back? As always, our expert panelists will help us understand the nuances of this issue and how we can move toward a more just economic reality. Thank you for joining us today. This series is made possible through the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, Region 10. Visit our website, exploringintersections.org, to find resources mentioned in today's conversation or to register to attend our next program. We broadcast live every second Wednesday of the month at 3 p.m. Central. You can also download podcasts of our panel discussions from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or via our website. And be sure to connect with us for the continuing conversation on Facebook. I'm Cherish Badzinski. Thanks for tuning in to Exploring Intersections.